For more on Ukraine and other matters in Washington, let's bring in the pros, Ed O'Keefe and Olivia Gazis. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent, joining us from the North Lawn, and Olivia is CBS News intelligence and national security reporter. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate your time. Ed, let's start with you. So the president, we hear, was on a roughly 80-minute call with other Western leaders about Ukraine. Do we have any idea what was discussed?
To some extent we do, Caitlin. Good to see you. He was on this call with 11 other leaders, Canada, European Commission, NATO, and the big Western European allies. White House says essentially they discussed their coordinated efforts to impose severe economic costs to hold Russia accountable, and they committed to continued close consultation. In other words, they continued to talk about keeping in close touch and coordinating any potential sanctions against Russia or any other steps that they might have to take of a non-military variety. And then there was also, we've since learned throughout the day today here in Washington, at least, more progress in getting more military equipment to Ukraine as it's been requested in a boost to their supplies and to their requests that more aid be sent their way. This is essentially what is now a regular or weekly occurrence, the president having maybe smaller meetings with key allies and then a bigger group meeting at some point to sort of keep everybody on the same page. He alluded to that in his stop in New Hampshire today, saying, look, that's part of the reason why I am on the phone every week now with the Europeans, is to make sure we're all, working together in concert on whatever response it is that there needs to be. Also, they were talking about the ongoing suffering there in eastern Ukraine and concerns, of course, about what's happening in Mariupol and elsewhere. So again, this is going to become a customary, rather routine part of what this president does now, holding these conference calls or these virtual video teleconferences and making sure that all the big players are on the same page.
And Olivia, last week we heard the Biden administration might be sending a top official to Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky. Do we know any more about this? I mean, it seems like logistical and security concerns would be a lot to work out for that kind of trip.
You're absolutely right, Caitlin. And we know that it's a move that the Ukrainians would very much welcome for symbolic and other reasons. And it's a visit that we hear President Biden would be keen on making himself, according to our sources. It would follow, of course, trips by other Western officials, including British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who was just there. And it's laden with that important symbolism that, of course, there's a strong partnership between Western nations and Ukraine, and, of course, that Kyiv is still in Ukrainian hands. As you say, it is incredibly fraught with logistical considerations. It would have to be secured from start to finish. And it's possible that if not the president, other senior officials, including the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State, could be dispatched. It's also possible that the visit could coincide with the reestablishment of an American diplomatic presence in Ukraine, which some countries have started to do. Up until now, the U.S. Embassy has been operating out of Poland. So a visit could coincide with the reopening of an embassy on Ukrainian territory. When the State Department was asked about these possibilities yesterday, they said they had no travel to announce, as did the White House. But they did make clear that as soon as the security situation allows it, and not a second later, diplomatic relations will be reestablished with the Ukraine. Diplomatic presence would be reestablished in Ukraine.
Yeah, a visit would be a big deal, so we'll keep an eye on that. And Olivia, I've also been wondering, what's the latest with what we know about China's involvement in all of this? Is there any sort of concrete evidence that China is backing Russia's military offensive in Ukraine at this point?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Caitlin, and it's one that diplomats and national security officials are very, very squarely focused on. The CIA director, in a public speech, his first public speech last week, said specifically of Xi Jinping's China that they are a silent partner in Putin's aggression in the war in Ukraine. And the U.S. has warned for weeks, of course, that China could face unspecified consequences if it was found to be providing material support to the Russians. The reason that there's concern is that thus far we have seen rhetorical support from the Chinese for Moscow. Some senior officials there have been repeating Kremlin-friendly talking points, disseminating disinformation, including, suggestions from Russia that the atrocities that the world has witnessed in Bucha were all a hoax. But CBS asked this very question again of the State Department yesterday. Has the U.S. seen evidence of other material support being provided by the Chinese to the Russians, whether that's weapons, supplies, or help in evading sanctions? And the State Department line was that an earlier U.S. assessment completed several weeks ago still stands. That kind of material support has still not been seen. But again, this is something that officials are focused on very, very, very closely.
And Olivia, sticking with China for a moment, should we read anything, or what should we read, I should say, into the Biden administration's decision to send 2 top officials to the Solomon Islands? What should we read into that?
Sure. So a very quick bit of geography first. The Solomon Islands are a group of 6 islands and hundreds of much smaller islands, pretty strategically located in the Pacific Ocean. They control a significant amount of ocean territory there, but they are a sovereign nation. So probably not coincidentally, soon after the White House announced this week that it was sending a top diplomat and a top Asia policy official to visit the Solomon Islands, the Chinese announced that they had just signed a security pact with them that was non-military in nature. Now, nobody has seen the actual text of this document, so it's not at all clear if that's true. Draft versions that were leaked previously suggested that there might be a military component to it. The concern is that a partnership between China and the Solomon Islands would open up that access to important ocean territory and could pave the way for the establishment of a Chinese military footprint there. It also opens up some intelligence concerns because it puts China in closer proximity to strategic U.S. outposts in Hawaii and Guam, which are not particularly close, but they are closer. And so that's why you have seen both the United States and the Australians come out yesterday after this agreement was announced, saying that it paves the way for regional instability and that it sets a troubling precedent for other nations in the region, especially if we start to see moves by the Chinese to expand their military footprint there.
That's fascinating, and that graphic gives us a good context for the region that we're looking at. Ed, I want to take us back to the home front. The president was in New Hampshire today. You and I both know that no politician goes to New Hampshire or Iowa, where he was last week, by accident. He seems to have some travels in the works. Do we expect him to be more on the campaign trail? Will he be campaigning for others? Does he have an eye on 2024? A little bit of both. Give us some sense of what you're seeing.
Yeah, if you look at where he's been and where he's going, Iowa, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and then later this week, Oregon and Washington State, and you say, what do all of these places have in common? It has far more to do with 2022 than 2024. In all of those states, there are so-called frontliners, or House Democrats facing tough re-election fights, essentially on the front lines of the fight with Republicans over control of the House. And the president, eager to use his political capital on the presidential bully pulpit to help buoy those candidates who are eager and willing to appear with him in public to talk about arguably the most popular thing he's done as president, get a massive historic infrastructure bill passed with votes from Democrats and Republicans. And he did that again today in New Hampshire alongside Congressman Chris Pappas, Congresswoman Annie Kuster, and Senator Maggie Hassan. All 3 of them likely to have competitive, closer than they're comfortable with, contests this year against Republican opponents. Notable that the Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, a good buddy of the president, showed up to say hello when he arrived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He has his eye on 2024. So does the president, of course. But Democrats, this White House, understand you got to get, or at least help out Democrats this year before you can start thinking ahead to 2024. He goes to Portland, Oregon on Thursday, Seattle on Friday for an Earth Day event, but in both cities we'll be spending some time raising money in person, his first in-person Democratic Party fundraisers of the year. There's a lot of money to be raised out in the Pacific Northwest for Democrats. He will be doing that and tending to some congressional candidates facing re-election out there as well. And you will continue to see this. It's going to be similar to what he did today, talking about the bipartisan infrastructure bill, talking about the American Rescue Plan that was passed last year to boost cities and states coming out of the pandemic, trying to explain away inflation as something that's caused primarily by Vladimir Putin, even though inflation began before the conflict in Ukraine, and then just sort of talking more broadly about what it is Democrats would like to do and would continue to do if they hold on to control of Congress next year.
Yeah, and a lot of campaigns have told us that they would welcome Biden to talk about infrastructure at any time. But another issue that could be, big in this election is the issue of student debt. It was a focal point for then candidate Biden, now President Biden. Can you tell us a little bit just quickly about the Department of Education's announcement this afternoon regarding student loans?
Yeah, so it's confusing for anyone who may not have one, or even for those that do. But in essence, the Education Department's making a change that could make 3.6 million people who borrow from the federal government or through federal student loan programs closer to eligibility or eligible for final debt forgiveness. As many as 40,000 borrowers may get immediate relief from the payments they still have to make. Essentially, it's designed to make sure that those who have to temporarily stop their payments have those months in which they've had to stop because they're making less money or they can't afford to make it count towards eventual forgiveness, and making sure that people who are in a public service loan forgiveness program or somebody who may get into public service in some way, either as a teacher or a diplomat or some other kind of government job or public service job, is making sure those people are actually getting their debt forgiveness and that they're not getting lost in the system. There have been several different investigations by news agencies in recent weeks about some of the fraud or the mismanagement of these loan programs and how people get mired in debt for decades at a time when the program wasn't designed to let that happen. But it also comes, as you alluded to, amid pressure from fellow Democrats, especially liberal ones, to forgive at least most, if not a big chunk of student loan debt held by people who owe the federal government back for going to college. They've put it off. There's a moratorium on these payments until late August. The hope among those that are pushing for this is that it goes away for many people, if not most people, by some point later this year. Either way, what was announced today by the Education Department is designed to fix the program. They say make it more equitable amid pressure from student advocates, Democrats, news organizations that have been tracking this that say it's been poorly mismanaged.
Yeah, big issue to see how that resonates with young voters. Ed O'Keefe and Olivia Gazis, you guys covered a lot of ground today. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.